What is up, guys? Fatal82 coming at you with some raid cam footage from the US Rustopia server. This is actually footage I was going to be using for the next edition of Rust Cribs, which will be coming out soon, so stay tuned. But as I was filming for Rust Cribs, a raid started occurring, so it's a bit of an impromptu raid. But what you're taking a look at right now is some raiders coming up to a compound, which is the compound of the Kingsmen, which is a relatively new group on Rustopia. Some things to take note of, guys, are that as this raid is beginning, you'll notice there's some shots being fired from a perimeter tower out here, which is by the entrance to the base down towards the raiders. But take note that this compound is surrounded by the outer perimeter stone walls. Those high stone exterior walls are very difficult to get through. They're very resource intensive. They require a lot of rockets and C4 to be able to get through. Now, as it turns to night, it's a bit difficult to see what's going on here. You'll notice that the night sky is lit up by muzzle flashes and rockets. And I'll go ahead and use the commentary to be able to keep you guys filled in on what's going on. So, as it turns to night, the raid party's down here on the beach. They're trying to figure out the best way to get into this compound. They're using some incendiary rockets here, which are going to be effective against that wooden perimeter tower out here, which is going to help to break down the wood. The fire will damage the wooden structures. It won't affect the stone, but if they can position those rockets up into that tower, it's going to help to smoke out the defenders who are up there, keeping the raiders at bay, and also to help break down that tower itself to open it up. You'll notice here, guys, the raiders are choosing to go through one of the perimeter stone walls rather than through the door. You might be wondering why, because the door would be a less resource-intensive option to go through. It would take only a few C4 to get through those two doors and be inside the compound. The reason they're doing that is that door actually has a stairwell on the outside of it, and if that staircase gets taken out, which could very well happen with the fires that are burning here, the raiders will have a more difficult time getting up into the compound here, because they'll have to essentially vault onto each other's backs. Ladders can no longer be used to get up there, so if those stairs were taken out, it would be a waste to use the C4, which is why they chose to go through the more resource-intensive option, which was that perimeter stone wall. You'll notice here that that wall was blown open, and now the raiders are inside the courtyard here. They're exchanging fire back and forth with the main tower, which is inside there. And at this point, guys, the defenders are doing what they want to do. They're staying calm and cool. They're doing their best to send some fire back towards, suppressing fire back towards the raiders. And the raiders are also doing what they want to do in this situation, which is keep pushing forward. Under the cover of night, they're firing rockets, they're moving into that compound, and they are doing things that is going to help disrupt the ability of the defenders to sort of call out shots. There is a bit of a choke point here because there's one way in and one way out, so the defenders do know where they're coming from, but it's very hard to gather numbers in terms of how many raiders are out here at night. You'll notice, guys, in terms of some things that are going on here, is that as this raid is progressing, that hole in the wall was just patched up by the defenders. So they went back out there with an exterior stone wall and they threw it up, essentially making that hard work that the raiders just did a bit less of a payoff, because now they can't get through that as easily. So they have to think about getting in another way. This tower here is playing a central role in the raid. That tower is allowing the defenders to be able to keep track of where the raiders are, and even though it's under the cover of night, those fires are helping to sort of light it up and illuminate what's going on down below. You'll notice here some raiders are just taken out down on the beach, again showing the perspective that that tower has in terms of the scope of it. So that tower gives them a great point of vantage on that front entrance, and one of the raiders here just miscalculated with his incendiary rocket, and it looks like he's now burning the top of the tower there, which is not a good move, and that makes it more difficult for him to know what's going on and also to position himself up in that tower. As we take a look at the perspective here, guys, you'll notice that the raiders were able to put down a building cabinet, so they have some limited building privilege here, and they were able to place a stairwell here. They're trying to get up over that perimeter stone wall, because now that that hole in the wall was sort of taken out, they now have to figure out another way. Because they can't use ladders, their next best option is to get up over that by building up to it, and they're able to get limited building privilege. So they're now choosing to do that. This is the forward operating base, the raid base by the raid team, and it's under attack right now by a member of the Kingsmen who went out there and tried to attack it. He didn't get too far, wasn't able to get in there. Kaya is still there holding it down. As you guys notice there, as it pans out, there's lots of sleeping bags and chests in there, and that also is surrounded by those outer perimeter stone walls. That's a good way to make a forward operating base on the fly. Instead of using something that's going to be really intensive in terms of resources, throw down some perimeter stone walls, put a doorway on it, and no one's going to be able to get in there unless they blow their way in there. You'll notice here, guys, that the raiders have made their way up into that perimeter tower, which is out by the entrance, and this is now going to play a central role in this raid. This is where it's sort of all going down at this point in time. For the most part, the Raiders have taken over this tower, they're holding it down, and they're sending fire back towards that main base, while the Kingsmen are on the inside of the courtyard trying their best to smoke the Raiders outside of that tower. You'll notice that as the Raiders die, guys, they're respawning back at that forward operating base, and they're coming back over as geared as they can be at this point in time. When a raid's going down, it's always a battle of attrition. It's a resource game, so it depends who has more resources, who can out-resource the other person. Notice there, guys, that that rocket just took out that stairwell to that main door, and that's why they chose not to go through that location. Because if that stairwell gets taken out, they can't just jump up into it. They would have to actually find another way in. That's an important aspect of this raid, and that's something that you guys want to pay attention to. So going back up the stairs here, this is the pathway that the Raiders are taking. They're using those stairs to get right into that perimeter tower, which gives them good cover, and they're able to really send some shots back towards the defenders. You'll notice here that it's still a bit of a choke point and a bottleneck. And as we take a look at the compound here, guys, notice the placement of those perimeter stone walls, how they're layered up here, and they really give this compound a sense of security to it. Because they're very difficult to get through, you really have to figure out the best way to get in here. Was this the best way for the Raiders to get in? I'm not sure, but it's the way that they committed to getting in, and they've pushed through. They're doing their best to move forward. Looking up here, guys, this is the top of that main base, which again gives those defenders a great vantage point, and they're sending fire back down towards the beach. And take note, guys, that the Raiders are coming back now a little less well-geared than they were before. They're coming back naked, with torches, with rocks, things that aren't really what you'd expect out of a raid team. The reason for that is most likely that things are running low in that forward operating base, so they probably ran out of gear, and a lot of the gear is still on the bodies here. So you notice that Raiders come back and they stop at the corpses, and they're picking up items off those bodies. When a big raid's going down, it's very chaotic, very hard to manage, and those bodies are high value items. There's lots of loot on those bodies, lots of armor, guns, C4, potentially rockets, so they are very much able to rejoin the fight by just running back and getting to a body. Inside this tower here, guys, this is the choke point right now. This is where the fight's going down. The Raiders and the defenders are in here. They're neck and neck, and they're trying to keep each other at bay. It's really, at this point, a battle of attrition, and it's going to be who can out-resource the other person. At this point in time, the defenders have helped to minimize against the raid team by patching up that hole in the wall early on, which has allowed the raid team to be funneled into this tower. And even though this tower is sort of being used against the defenders, it's actually being used wisely by the defenders in terms of being an awesome choke point. So you'll notice lots of bodies piling up in here. This is turning into a bit of a tomb, and it's really neck and neck at this point. Again, guys, take note of those perimeter stone walls here and how they're able to layer them up, allowing the compound to be relatively well secured without having to use a ton of resources. Again, this tower is now the site of lots of carnage. There are members of the raid team trading fire with the defenders, and it's very hard to tell who's who when your boots are on the ground. You're going to have friendly fire going on, which is why you'll see members shooting each other and picking them back up. And the defenders are shooting rockets back to this tower because this is now where the Raiders are, and that's what they have to focus on. The defenders have done an awesome job of really mitigating against the magnitude of the raid team here, and as we see again, guys, just the amount of bodies and carnage that's piling up in this tower, and it's really sort of a sight to behold. There are bodies on top of bodies, and that's really something that is kind of spectacular to see in such a confined area. I'd like to call this a tomb. A tomb is usually an underground vault, but I don't know of a better word for it, a mausoleum perhaps, but it's a building full of bodies. It's a bit of a kill house, which is cool. Again, guys, lots of action in a confined space here. You'll notice members are diving down there with whatever they have available. B Chills is kicking ass with a torch down there, and hopefully get a hold of a gun. He's an absolute beast when he has a gun in his hand, and he doesn't do too bad with a torch either, as we can see. And the fires that are burning in here are from the incendiary ammo that's being used, also from some of the incendiary rockets that were fired at this location. Those fires will actually burn up the bodies, which will in turn burn up the loot. So if you're going to go ahead and loot those bodies, you got to do so in a very quick manner because you're going to lose perhaps what's on those bodies. You notice here that the defenders and the raiders are taking careful stock of what's here and looking for the items that they're going to need to be able to continue the fight. Again, guys, this is the pathway that the Raiders have to work with at this point in time. They have to get up in that tower and out of that tower and back into the courtyard in order to be progressing forward. They're not getting too far at this point in time. Again, you can see the amount of bodies that have piled up in here. They're slung over the side of the building. They're absolutely littering this tower here. And as we pan back out, you can see that the tower has a bunch of holes in it as well. That's from the rockets that were fired before. And moving back down and taking a look at that forward operating base, it was hit again. And this time, the members of the Kingsmen were able to breach this area. I'm unclear as to what they may have gotten out of this area because it looks like there's still a bunch of members here. Pharaoh's down here. He's in a crack shot, so he's no one to be messed with. And they're patching this base back up at this point in time. The Kingsmen are coming back down and taking the fight towards that forward operating base. And at this point in time, it looks as though the Raiders have actually chosen to move out of that location. They may have taken what they had that was left in that area and decided to cut their losses and get out of there. Back at that main base, due to those choke points and the quick thinking of the Kingsmen, they weren't able to get too far. So at this point in time, they're moving out, and the Kingsmen are in hot pursuit. As the Raiders cut their losses and begin to move out here, you'll notice there's some small skirmishes that are taking place here. At this point in time, the defenders really have to choose how far they're going to chase the Raiders, and probably the best thing to do is to do it just to the point where they're sure that they're going to be gone, rather than flanking back around and hitting that base while the defenders are outside of the compound. You'll notice Pharaoh's sticking around down here, and he's taking out the defenders as they come around. He's in the natural formational landscape to his advantage, hiding behind rocks, and he's doing a damn fine job of taking out as many defenders as possible. As some small skirmishes go on here, guys, and we end the raid cam, you'll notice that the defenders are in hot pursuit, and the Raiders are actually setting up a bit of a trap here by using the perimeter wooden walls to go ahead and set up a bit of a barricade here in anticipation that the defenders will continue to pursue them. However, the defenders are choosing to go back to the base and return home. Hope you guys enjoyed the raid cam. As always, Fado82, peace.
Rigo, you're honestly a pussy.
We're gonna go help.
Coco, give me a gun.
Back up, base.
Give me a gun. Here, take this. Rigo, I love you. Give me a kiss, Rigo. Take this. Mwah.